Before we begin, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Thank you. The Crithian ambassador looked at the human delegation as if they had just volunteered to walk naked into a star, and Lieutenant Owen Reed couldn't quite tell if the alien's expression was one of respect or pity. "You understand what you're proposing?" Ambassador Thelkan asked, his throat sacs pulsing with what Owen's translator identified as profound concern. The Void Lattice has consumed 43 expeditions in the last cycle alone. Not defeated them, not repelled them, consumed them, ships, crews, memories, everything. The space itself is wrong there, hostile to the concept of existence. Captain Nathan Cross, sitting to Owen's left, had that particular smile on his face that Owen had learned to associate with terrible decisions being made with absolute confidence. "We've read the reports, Ambassador. And you still wish to proceed?" "Wish is a strong word," Nathan replied, "but yes, we'll take the contract." The briefing room fell silent. Even the Crithian delegation's translator units seemed to hesitate before rendering Nathan's words into their clicking, harmonic language. Around the table, representatives from 6 different species stared at the 3 humans with expressions that ranged from disbelief to what might have been the alien equivalent of checking to see if someone was joking. Owen understood their reaction. The mission briefing had been comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely terrifying. The Void Lattice was a region of space approximately 6 light-years across that had appeared without warning in the Tertius sector 18 months ago. It didn't behave like normal space. Ships that entered experienced time dilation, dimensional instability, and what the scientific reports euphemistically called aggressive reality degradation. The first expedition had been a Crithian science vessel with a crew of 40. They had entered the Lattice broadcasting updates every 10 seconds. The broadcasts had continued for approximately 3 minutes before cutting off abruptly. When recovery teams had gone in to investigate, they had found nothing. No debris, no energy signatures, no evidence that a ship had ever been there at all. The pattern had repeated itself 42 more times with different species, different technologies, and different strategies. Every mission had ended the same way, complete and utter disappearance. The Galactic Council had designated the Void Lattice as a Level 9 hazard zone and established quarantine protocols to prevent anyone else from throwing their lives away. But there was a problem. The lattice was expanding. Slowly but measurably, it was growing larger, consuming more space, threatening shipping lanes and inhabited systems that couldn't simply be evacuated. Someone needed to go inside and figure out how to stop it, or at least figure out what it was. The Council had put out a call for volunteers among its member species, offering substantial compensation and guaranteed recognition for anyone brave or desperate enough to attempt the mission. The response had been underwhelming. A few military units had volunteered out of duty. Some scientific teams had expressed interest out of morbid curiosity, but when the actual mission parameters had been explained in detail, most had quietly withdrawn their applications. Humanity, having joined the Galactic Council only 8 months ago, had been notably absent from the initial volunteer pool. This had surprised no one. The humans were new to galactic politics, still learning the ropes of interstellar diplomacy, and generally kept to themselves when it came to dangerous council business, which made their sudden appearance at the mission briefing all the more unexpected. "I must ask," Ambassador Thelkan continued, his voice taking on the formal cadence that indicated he was speaking for the record now. "Have you considered that this mission has a statistical survival probability of 0%? That is not hyperbole. Every single expedition has failed. Every single crew has been lost. There is no reason to believe that you would fare any differently." "That's because everyone's been approaching it wrong," said the third human, a stocky man named Kevin, who had been introduced as the team's technical specialist. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a minor engineering problem rather than a cosmic anomaly that had killed thousands. "You've all been treating it like it's a natural phenomenon that needs to be studied, something to be approached carefully, scientifically, with proper protocols and safety measures." "Is it not?" asked Velshara, the Altarian science minister, her crystalline features reflecting the briefing room's harsh lights in patterns that suggested genuine curiosity. Kevin shrugged. Maybe, but from what we've seen in your data, it behaves more like an immune response than a natural formation. It's reactive, adaptive, and it only gets aggressive when something enters it with the wrong posture, I guess you'd call it. You cannot possibly deduce that from the sensor logs alone, Velshara objected. The data is incomplete, contradictory in places, and shows a clear pattern once you stop looking for scientific explanations and start treating it like it's alive, Nathan interrupted gently. Every expedition that went in was either heavily armed, extensively shielded, or both. They went in expecting a fight, and the lattice gave them one. They went in trying to protect themselves, and the lattice interpreted that as aggression. The silence that followed was different from the earlier skepticism. This was the silence of intelligent beings processing an idea that was simultaneously obvious and impossible. You're suggesting, Ambassador Thelkan said slowly, that the void lattice is conscious. We're suggesting, Owen said, speaking up for the first time, that it doesn't matter if it's conscious or not. What matters is that it responds to intent. Everything that went in was afraid of it, hostile to it, or trying to conquer it, so we're going to try something different. Which is? Nathan's smile widened slightly. We're going to walk through it like it's not even there. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several delegates began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of objections, concerns, and what Owen was pretty sure were accusations of insanity in at least 3 different languages. Ambassador Thelkan raised a hand, calling for silence. When the room had quieted, he leaned forward, his posture radiating what the cultural briefing had described as parental concern for a dangerously naive child. "Explain," he said simply. Nathan glanced at Owen and Kevin, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he turned back to the assembled delegates and began laying out their plan. It was, by any reasonable standard, completely insane. They would take a single ship, not a military vessel or a heavily shielded science craft, but a basic transport shuttle with minimal modifications, no weapons, no defensive systems beyond what was necessary for basic navigation. They would enter the void lattice without shields, without armor, broadcasting their presence openly rather than trying to hide or defend. "You'll die in seconds," Velshara stated flatly. "Possibly," Nathan agreed. "But every other approach has failed. We think the lattice is less dangerous than everyone believes. It's just reacting to perceived threats. If we go in without presenting as a threat, without the aggressive posture that everyone else has used, we might get through. And if you're wrong, then we die quickly instead of slowly," Owen said. "But we don't think we're wrong." The debate had continued for another hour, with delegates raising objections ranging from practical concerns about equipment to philosophical questions about whether intentionally minimizing defenses constituted suicide. But in the end, the math was simple. Every other approach had failed, the lattice was still growing, and the humans were volunteering to try something different. The Council had approved the mission with a vote that Ambassador Thelkan later described as reluctant resignation in the face of inevitable human stubbornness. That had been 3 days ago. Now Owen stood in the docking bay of the Council station, watching as Kevin performed final checks on their shuttle. The Lucky Fool was exactly as promised, a basic transport craft with minimal systems, enough life support for 2 weeks, and navigation equipment that would let them plot a course through the lattice if they survived long enough to need it. "You know this is crazy, right?" Owen said, not for the first time. "Absolutely," Kevin replied, without looking up from his console. "But crazy is kind of our specialty." Nathan emerged from the shuttle's small cargo bay, carrying what looked like 3 standard-issue pressure suits and a duffel bag that clinked when he set it down. "Final supplies are loaded. We're good to go whenever you are." Owen looked at his 2 companions and wondered, not for the first time, how he had ended up here. 3 months ago, he had been a shuttle pilot for the Terran Colonial Service. running supply routes between Earth's outer settlements and making just enough credits to keep his ship fueled. Then, Nathan had shown up with a job offer that sounded too good to be true. Join a small private team doing specialized consulting for alien clients, with pay that was roughly 10 times what he was making hauling cargo. The catch, Owen had assumed, would reveal itself eventually. It always did. The catch, it turned out, was that specialized consulting meant doing the jobs that were too dangerous, too weird, or too legally questionable for anyone else to touch. Their first mission had involved recovering stolen data from a pirate station. The second had been escorting a Sleen diplomat through hostile territory. The third had been investigating reports of ghost ships in the Outer Rim. All of them had been dangerous. All of them had paid well. And all of them had left Owen with the growing suspicion that Nathan was either the luckiest man in the galaxy or genuinely insane. Maybe both. "Final checks," Nathan announced, his voice taking on the crisp professionalism that meant they were transitioning from preparation to execution. "Kevin, systems? All green. Minimal shielding online, life support at maximum efficiency, navigation logs loaded with every scrap of data we could pull from previous expeditions." "Owen, flight controls? Ready. I've plotted 3 possible routes through the lattice based on the entry points previous teams used. If we survive the initial penetration, I can adjust on the fly." "Good. Remember, the goal isn't to fight or avoid, it's to accept. Whatever happens in there, we don't panic. We don't respond with aggression, and we don't try to outsmart something that's already outsmarted everyone else." "Walk through it like it's not even there," Owen repeated, trying to inject more confidence into his voice than he actually felt. "Exactly." They boarded the Lucky Fool in silence, each of them moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had worked together long enough to develop their own rhythm. Owen took the pilot seat, while Kevin settled into the engineering station and Nathan positioned himself at navigation. The Council had provided them with a departure window that would take them directly to the lattice's nearest edge, a courtesy that felt uncomfortably like a funeral procession. As Owen fired up the engines and requested departure clearance, he could see the observation deck of the Council station lighting up with dozens of figures, all of them coming to watch the humans' departure. To watch them die, more likely. "Control, this is Lucky Fool requesting clearance for departure," Owen transmitted. "Lucky Fool, you are cleared for departure, maintaining safe distance until you clear the station perimeter." There was a pause, then, "Good luck. May your journey be swift." "Thanks, Control. Lucky Fool out." The shuttle pulled away from the station with the gentle grace of a ship that knew it was about to do something monumentally stupid. Behind them, Owen knew, tracking sensors would be following their progress, recording every moment for analysis after they inevitably disappeared. The journey to the lattice's edge took 6 hours at standard acceleration. They spent the time in relative silence, each of them dealing with their pre-mission nerves in their own way. Kevin ran diagnostics on systems that had already been checked 3 times. Nathan reviewed the fragmentary data from previous expeditions, looking for patterns that might help them survive the next few minutes. Owen just flew, letting the familiar rhythm of the controls calm his mind. As they approached the lattice boundary, the shuttle's sensors began registering anomalies. Space itself seemed to shimmer at the edges of their perception, as if reality was becoming less certain the closer they got. The visual display showed what looked like a vast wall of twisted light, colors that shouldn't exist flowing across the view screen in patterns that made Owen's eyes hurt if he looked too directly. "Entering sensor range of the boundary," Kevin announced. "Energy readings are... I don't even know what to call this. Every spectrum is registering activity, but none of it makes sense according to known physics." "Does it look hostile?" Nathan asked. "It looks active, like a living thing. I can see why previous teams thought it was attacking them. It's reaching out, sort of. Testing, probing. And if we don't fight back?" Kevin was quiet for a moment, studying his instruments. "Then maybe it doesn't fight us." Owen took a deep breath and adjusted their course, pointing the lucky fool directly at the center of the boundary region. "Last chance to back out," he said, hating how his voice shook slightly. "Keep going," Nathan said quietly. The shuttle crossed the boundary at exactly 1847 hours station time. For a moment, nothing happened. The lattice simply surrounded them, its impossible colors filling the view screen with patterns that made Owen's head swim. He kept his hands steady on the controls, maintained their course, and tried very hard not to think about the 43 expeditions that had disappeared in this exact situation. Then, the ship began to change. It wasn't damage, exactly. Nothing was breaking or failing, but Owen could feel the lucky fool becoming different. The controls under his hands felt like they were reshaping themselves, the familiar switches and buttons becoming strange and unfamiliar, even as they remained physically identical. "Anyone else feeling this?" he asked. "Yeah," Kevin breathed. "It's like the ship is remembering how to be something else." "Stay calm," Nathan ordered. "Don't fight it. Let it happen." The lattice pressed in around them, and Owen suddenly understood what the previous expeditions had experienced in their final moments. It wasn't that the lattice was hostile, it was that it was curious. It was examining them, testing them, trying to understand what they were and what they wanted. And if they responded with fear or aggression, it would respond in kind. Owen forced his breathing to slow, forced his hands to remain gentle on the controls, forced himself to accept what was happening rather than resist it. Beside him, he could hear Kevin and Nathan doing the same, their breathing synchronizing into a pattern that felt almost meditative. The ship continued to change. The walls seemed to become transparent, showing them glimpses of other places, other times. Owen saw a Crithian warship being pulled apart, molecule by molecule, its crew screaming silently as they dissolved into component atoms. He saw a Sleen science vessel frozen in temporal stasis, its crew aging decades in seconds. He saw ships from species he didn't recognize, all of them dying in ways that suggested the lattice had learned what each one feared most and provided exactly that. But the lucky fool wasn't dying, it was transforming. "Navigation," Nathan said, his voice distant and strange. "Owen, I need you to plot a new course." "To where?" "Through." Owen checked his instruments and found them displaying information that shouldn't exist, coordinates that existed in more dimensions than should be possible. A route that led not around the lattice, but through it, following pathways that his equipment assured him were perfectly safe, despite being completely impossible. He plotted the course because there was nothing else to do. Because refusing would mean fighting, and fighting would mean dying, and dying would mean becoming just another statistic in the Council's growing list of failed expeditions. The lucky fool followed the impossible route with ease that defied explanation. They traveled through spaces that existed between spaces, following corridors of twisted reality that should have torn them apart, but instead seemed to welcome them. The journey took minutes or hours or days. Time itself had become negotiable inside the lattice, and Owen found he couldn't quite remember how long they'd been flying. Then, abruptly, they were through. The lattice released them into normal space with a sensation like breaking the surface of water after swimming too deep. Owen gasped, suddenly aware that he'd been holding his breath without realizing it. His instruments snapped back to familiar configurations, showing readings that made sense again. Behind them, the lattice boundary shimmered and settled, looking like nothing more than a particularly dense nebula. "Status report," Nathan said, his voice rough as if he hadn't spoken in days. "We're alive," Kevin said, sounding genuinely surprised. "All systems nominal. We're on the far side of the lattice, approximately 6.3 light-years from our entry point." "Impossible," Owen muttered. "That should have taken days at maximum burn." "Welcome to the Void Lattice," Nathan replied, "where physics is more of a suggestion than a law." They drifted in silence for several minutes, each of them processing what had just happened. They had done what 43 expeditions before them had failed to do. They had entered the Void Lattice and survived. More than survived. They had passed through it entirely, crossing 6 light years of space in less time than it should take to travel 6 million kilometers. "This is going to change everything," Kevin said softly. Nathan nodded. "If we can teach others how to do it. If we can explain what we learned in there." "Can we?" Owen asked. "Because I'm not sure I even understand what happened." "We stopped fighting," Nathan said simply. "That's all. Every other expedition went in trying to conquer the lattice or study it or survive it. We just let it be what it was, and it let us pass." Owen wanted to argue that it couldn't be that simple, but the evidence was impossible to deny. They were alive. They were through. And they had proven that the void lattice wasn't an impenetrable barrier. It was a test, one that humanity had apparently just passed. "Control is going to lose their minds," Kevin observed. "We should probably let them know we're alive before they start planning our memorial service." Owen reached for the communications panel, then hesitated. "What do we tell them?" Nathan considered the question. The truth, that it's not about technology or weapons or shields. It's about approach, about intention, about being willing to accept something instead of trying to fight it. "They're not going to believe us." "Probably not," Nathan agreed. "But the data will speak for itself. We made it through. That's proof enough." Owen opened the channel and began transmitting their status report. As he spoke, describing their journey through the lattice in terms that didn't quite capture the strangeness of the experience, he could almost hear the disbelief in the silence that followed his transmission. Then Control responded, and Owen heard something in the operator's voice that he'd never expected. Hope. "Lucky fool, confirm your position. Are you saying you successfully traversed the void lattice?" "Confirmed, Control. We are on the far side of the anomaly. All crew alive and unharmed. Ship systems nominal." Another pause, longer this time. When Control spoke again, there were multiple voices in the background, a chaos of excited discussion barely contained by professional protocol. "Lucky fool, maintain your position. Multiple vessels are being dispatched to your coordinates for confirmation and debrief. Estimated arrival, 8 hours." "Understood, Control. We'll be waiting." The channel closed, leaving the 3 humans alone in the quiet of the shuttle's cabin. Outside the viewport, stars that had been inaccessible hours ago now spread out before them. Whole sectors of space suddenly within reach thanks to the shortcut they'd discovered. 8 hours, Kevin said. "What do we do until then?" Nathan smiled, that familiar expression of someone who had just pulled off something impossible and was already thinking about the next challenge. "We document everything we can remember, every sensation, every reading, every moment of the passage, because we're going to have to teach others how to do this, and we'll need to be very, very precise." They spent the next hours working through their experiences, comparing notes and trying to translate subjective impressions into objective data. It was harder than Owen had expected. "How did you describe the feeling of space reshaping itself around you? How did you quantify the sensation of accepting reality's dissolution without panic?" The council ships arrived exactly 8 hours later, a small fleet of vessels representing half a dozen species. They approached the Lucky Fool with what Owen interpreted as extreme caution, as if afraid that the humans might have been contaminated by something infectious. Ambassador Thelkan was aboard the lead ship. His face on the comm screen showed an expression that Owen's cultural training couldn't quite pass. Something between amazement and the particular exhaustion that came from having one's fundamental assumptions about reality proven incorrect. "You survived," the ambassador said, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "We did more than survive," Nathan replied. "We found a way through, and we can teach others to do the same." The debrief that followed took 3 days. They were transferred to a council research vessel and subjected to every scan, interview, and psychological evaluation that 6 different species could devise. Medical teams examined them for signs of temporal displacement, dimensional contamination, or exotic radiation exposure. Scientists questioned them about every detail of their passage, looking for some technological explanation for their success. What they found was simultaneously disappointing and revolutionary. There was no trick, no special equipment, no secret technique that had allowed the humans to survive. They had simply approached the lattice differently than anyone else had dared to try. "It's a matter of psychology as much as physics," Nathan explained during one of the scientific briefings. "The lattice responds to intent. When you go in expecting to fight, expecting to die, trying to protect yourself, it interprets that as aggression and responds accordingly. But if you go in accepting what it is, without resistance or fear, it lets you pass." "That's absurd," declared Velshara, the Altarian scientist who had been assigned to lead the investigation. "You're suggesting that a cosmic phenomenon has psychological awareness? That it judges intent?" "I'm suggesting that it responds to intent," Nathan corrected. "Whether it's aware in any meaningful sense, I couldn't say, but the pattern is undeniable. Aggression begets destruction. Acceptance allows passage." "And you expect others to replicate your success based on this philosophy?" "We expect others to try," Nathan said calmly, "because the alternative is abandoning entire sectors of space to a phenomenon that doesn't need to be impassable." The scientific community remained skeptical, but the council couldn't ignore the evidence. The humans had survived where everyone else had failed. More importantly, their sensor logs showed clear readings of the route they had taken. A path through the lattice that could theoretically be followed by any ship whose crew could maintain the right mental state. A second expedition was organized within a week. A volunteer crew of Crithian scientists, coached by Nathan on the principles of acceptance over resistance, prepared to attempt the crossing. Owen watched the preparations with mixed feelings. On one hand, he wanted others to succeed, to prove that their discovery was reproducible. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, some element of their success that couldn't be taught or replicated. The Crithian team entered the lattice 3 days later. Their transmission lasted approximately 2 minutes before cutting off, exactly as all the previous failed expeditions had done. They never emerged on the far side. The news hit Owen harder than he expected. He'd never met the Crithian crew personally, but knowing that his advice had effectively led them to their deaths sat heavy on his conscience. Nathan took it more philosophically, treating it as data rather than tragedy, but even he seemed subdued in the days that followed. "It wasn't their fault," Kevin said during one of their private discussions. "They did everything we told them to do. Minimal shields, non-aggressive posture, open acceptance of the lattice's nature." "Then why did they die?" Owen asked. "Because it's not enough to know the right approach intellectually," Nathan said quietly. "You have to feel it. You have to genuinely not be afraid, genuinely accept what's happening. The Crithians tried, but they went in knowing they might die. That expectation, that fear, the lattice sensed it and responded." "So, only people who are suicidal can make it through?" "No," Nathan said firmly. "Only people who can genuinely accept death as a possibility without letting it define their actions. There's a difference." Owen thought about that for a long time. He remembered the crossing, the moment when he'd stopped fighting the lattice's transformations and simply accepted them. It hadn't been about not caring whether he died. It had been about recognizing that his fear was irrelevant to the situation, that fighting would only make things worse. It was a very human kind of acceptance, the ability to face something terrifying and decide that terror itself was the enemy, not the thing causing it. "We need to try again," Nathan announced during a briefing with Ambassador Thelkan 3 days later. "But this time, we bring someone with us. Someone from another species who can learn the technique firsthand." The ambassador's throat sacs pulsed with what Owen had learned to recognize as profound skepticism. "You want to take another crew member into the lattice after what happened to the Crithian team?" "A single individual," Nathan clarified. "Someone young enough to learn new ways of thinking, experienced enough to handle unexpected situations, and psychologically stable enough to face death without panicking. You're describing a very rare combination of traits." "We're describing what's necessary," Nathan replied. "If we can't teach others to cross, then our discovery is useless. But if we can demonstrate the technique with a mixed species crew, prove that it's not something unique to humans, then we open up entire sectors of space to safe travel." The search for a volunteer took 2 weeks and involved psychological screening that would have made military recruitment look casual by comparison. In the end, they found their candidate in an unlikely source, a young Sleen pilot named Kesh, who had been applying to every dangerous mission he could find in what his superiors described as either a death wish or an exceptionally high risk tolerance. Owen met Kesh for the first time in a briefing room aboard the council station. The Sleen was younger than Owen had expected, his scales still showing the bright patterns of adolescence, his movements carrying the nervous energy of someone who wanted desperately to prove himself. "You understand what you're volunteering for?" Owen asked. Kesh's translator rendered his response in flat, emotionless tones that contrasted sharply with the excited clicking of his native speech. "I understand that you have done something that everyone said was impossible. I wish to learn how." "It's not about learning," Nathan said gently. "It's about unlearning, about letting go of everything you think you know about survival and danger and protection." "I am willing to try." "Willing isn't enough," Kevin added. "You have to be capable of complete acceptance in the moment, not intellectual understanding, but genuine emotional embrace of whatever happens." Kesh was silent for a moment, his scales shifting through patterns that Owen's cultural briefing identified as deep thought. "My people have a saying, the river flows whether you push against it or swim with it. I think I understand what you ask." "Intellectually, yes," Nathan agreed, "but in practice, when the lattice is remaking reality around you and every instinct is screaming at you to fight or flee, that's when understanding becomes meaningless unless it's rooted in something deeper than thought." They spent 3 days preparing Kesh for the crossing, not teaching him techniques or strategies, but helping him find within himself the capacity for radical acceptance that had allowed the humans to survive. It was frustrating work, trying to explain something that was more emotional than intellectual, more instinct than strategy. But Kesh proved to be an apt student. He listened with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism, asked questions that showed he was trying to understand not just what to do, but why it mattered. By the 3rd day, Owen thought he saw something changing in the young Sleen's demeanor, a kind of relaxed readiness that suggested he was beginning to internalize the lessons. "I think he's ready," Nathan announced on the evening of the 3rd day. "You think?" Owen asked. "That's not exactly inspiring confidence." "There's no way to be certain until we're in there," Nathan replied. "But I believe he has the right mindset. Whether he can maintain it under pressure, we'll find out." The lucky fool departed the council station the next morning with a crew of 4 instead of 3. Kesh had insisted on bringing minimal personal equipment, understanding that the mission was as much about psychological state as physical preparation. As they approached the lattice boundary for the 2nd time, Owen felt his earlier nervousness return, amplified by the responsibility of keeping their Sleen passenger alive. "Remember," Nathan said, as they neared the shimmer of twisted space, "whatever happens, don't fight. Don't try to protect Kesh, or yourself, or the ship. Just accept." "Accept," Kesh repeated, his translator carrying an odd harmony in the word. "The river flows." They crossed the boundary at 13:22 station time. This time, Owen knew what to expect. The sensation of the ship reshaping itself around them, the impossible vistas of other times and places, the pressing curiosity of something vast examining their intentions. He let it all wash over him, maintained his course through spaces that shouldn't exist, and tried not to think about whether Kesh was managing to do the same. Beside him, he could hear the Sleen's breathing, rapid at first, then gradually slowing as he fought to control his fear response. Owen wanted to offer encouragement, but knew that any attempt at communication might break the delicate mental state that was keeping them alive. The journey through felt longer this time, though Owen couldn't say if that was objective reality or subjective perception. They traveled through corridors of twisted light, past echoes of the ships that had died here, following a route that his instruments showed with impossible precision. Then, just as before, they broke through into normal space. Owen gasped, realized he'd been holding his breath again, and forced his lungs to remember their proper function. Kevin was checking systems with shaking hands. Nathan was already plotting their position relative to the exit point, and Kesh was laughing. It was a strange sound, filtered through the Sleen's translator into something that resembled human laughter, but carried harmonics that spoke of an entirely different emotional context. But there was joy in it, unmistakable and profound. "We survived," Kesh said, his scales showing patterns that Owen's briefing identified as intense pleasure mixed with disbelief. "We swam with the river, and it carried us through." "You did well," Nathan said, and Owen could hear genuine respect in his voice. "Very well. How do you feel?" "Like I have seen something that was never meant to be seen," Kesh replied. "Like I understand now why everyone else died. They fought, they resisted, they tried to impose their will on something that cannot be opposed. But you didn't." "I thought about my death," Kesh said quietly. "I imagined dying in there, dissolved or frozen or torn apart, and I found that I was curious, not afraid, not resigned, just curious about what form my end would take. And once I embraced that curiosity, once I stopped trying to prevent something that might be inevitable, the lattice stopped trying to kill me." Owen realized they had just witnessed something profound, not just another successful crossing, but the confirmation that their technique was teachable, reproducible, not limited to human psychology or human courage. The river flows, whether you push against it or swim with it. The implications were staggering. The Council's response to their success was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, training protocols were being developed based on their experiences. Psychological evaluation criteria were established to identify individuals capable of the necessary mental state. Plans were drawn up for regular crossings, for establishing waypoints within the lattice, for transforming what had been an impassable barrier into a navigable shortcut. But even as the galaxy celebrated what the media was calling the human solution to the void lattice problem, Owen found himself troubled by questions that no one else seemed to be asking. Why did the lattice exist at all? What purpose did it serve? And most troubling, what were they really traveling through when they passed from one side to the other? He raised these concerns during a private meeting with Nathan and Kevin 3 days after their successful crossing with Kesh. "I keep thinking about what we saw in there," Owen said. "The echoes of destroyed ships, the impossible vistas, the sensation of the lattice examining us. It felt less like passing through an anomaly and more like being evaluated." "Evaluated for what?" Kevin asked. "That's what worries me. What if the lattice isn't just a natural phenomenon? What if it's deliberate, a test or a filter of some kind?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I've had similar thoughts," he admitted finally. "The way it responds to intent, the precision with which it eliminated crews that approached it incorrectly. It's almost surgical, purposeful." "So, what do we do about it?" "We pay attention," Nathan said. "We document everything, watch for patterns, and try to understand what we've really discovered here. But we don't panic, and we don't stop people from using the crossing. Because even if it is some kind of test, we've proven we can pass it. And if passing it opens us up to something worse." Nathan smiled, that familiar expression of a man who lived by the principle that any problem could be solved with the right application of human stubbornness. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Over the next weeks, more ships successfully crossed the lattice using the techniques they had developed. Not all attempts succeeded. A few crews still failed, their fear proving too great or their acceptance too shallow. But the success rate climbed from 0% to nearly 40%, and with each successful crossing, humanity's reputation as the species that could do the impossible grew stronger. It was Ambassador Thelkan who first noticed the pattern in the failures. He called a meeting with the human team 5 weeks after their initial success. his expression carrying what Owen had learned to recognize as troubled uncertainty. "We've been analyzing the failed crossings," the ambassador said without preamble, "looking for commonalities that might help us improve our success rate, and we found something troubling." "What kind of something?" Nathan asked. Thelkan brought up a series of graphs showing timeline data from all attempted crossings. Every failed attempt has occurred exactly 72 hours after a successful crossing by the same species, as if the lattice is learning, adapting, closing the door after a certain number pass through. Owen felt ice settle in his stomach. "You're saying it's deliberately limiting how many of each species can cross?" "I'm saying the data suggests a pattern of deliberate filtering," Thelkan replied. 3 human crossings, successful. 4th attempt, 73 hours after the 3rd, failed. 2 Sleen crossings after Kesh's success. 3rd attempt, exactly 72 hours later, failed. The pattern holds across every species that has attempted multiple crossings. Kevin was already pulling up the data on his own terminal, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls. He's right. The mathematical precision is too exact to be coincidence. It's like a quota system. "A quota for what purpose?" Nathan asked, though Owen could hear in his voice that he already suspected the answer. "Unknown," Thelkan said. "But if I were to speculate based on the evidence, I would say the lattice is selecting, choosing which individuals are permitted to pass based on criteria we don't fully understand. And once a sufficient number from each species have crossed, it begins refusing entry to others." "How many have crossed total?" Owen asked. Thelkan's throat sacs pulsed slowly. "Across all species, approximately 300 individuals. A statistically insignificant number compared to the billions who might wish to use the passage. But significant if you're trying to select representatives," Nathan said quietly. 300 individuals, diverse species backgrounds, all of them demonstrating the capacity for radical acceptance in the face of the unknown. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. If the lattice was selecting individuals based on psychological traits, if it was deliberately limiting passage to those who met specific criteria, then it wasn't a shortcut through space at all. It was a filter, a test, a selection process for something that none of them had considered. "We need to go back in," Owen said suddenly. "We need to understand what's really happening in there." "Back in?" Thelkan's scales showed patterns of concern. "You've already crossed twice successfully. According to the pattern, a 3rd attempt will fail, probably," Owen finished. "But that's exactly what we need to happen. We need to experience what the failed expeditions experienced, understand what the lattice does when it rejects someone. Because right now, we're operating blind, celebrating a discovery we don't actually understand." Nathan looked at him with an expression that might have been respect or concern. "You realize you're volunteering for what could be a suicide mission." "Everyone keeps calling things suicide missions," Owen replied. "We called crossing the lattice the first time a suicide mission. Worked out pretty well, didn't it?" "The first time, we had no idea what we were facing," Kevin pointed out. "This time, we're deliberately provoking something that has killed thousands. That's different." "It's necessary," Owen insisted, "because if we don't understand what the lattice really is, what it's really doing, then we're just stumbling forward into something that could be far more dangerous than a simple navigation hazard." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, Owen's logic proved difficult to refute. They needed to understand the lattice's true nature, and the only way to do that was to experience its rejection protocols firsthand. The Council authorized the mission with extreme reluctance over the vocal objections of several delegates who argued that deliberately provoking an anomaly that had killed thousands was irresponsible at best and criminally negligent at worst. But humanity's success rate had earned them enough political capital to push the mission through, and 3 days later, the lucky fool was once again preparing for departure. This time, however, they took precautions. The shuttle was equipped with advanced sensor arrays designed to capture every possible data point during their expected failure. They wore biometric monitors that would track their physical and psychological states through whatever came next. And they established deadman protocols that would automatically transmit all collected data if the crew failed to check in after a specified time period. "This feels different," Kevin observed as they approached the lattice boundary for what Owen knew might be the last time. "First crossing, we were scared but hopeful. Second crossing with Kesh, we were confident. This time we're walking in knowing we're probably going to die," Owen finished. "Yeah, it feels different because it is different." Nathan, surprisingly, seemed the calmest of the three. "Whatever happens in there, remember, we're not trying to survive this time. We're trying to learn. Stay observant. Document everything you can. And if this is the end, well, we've had a good run." They crossed the boundary at 0934 hours station time. The difference was immediate and profound. Where before the lattice had felt curious, almost welcoming in its alien way, now it felt actively hostile. The ship didn't transform gradually. It was attacked, torn at by forces that wanted to understand its component parts by taking it apart piece by piece. Owen felt the controls fighting him, systems failing in sequence as something vast and implacable examined their vessel with the dispassionate curiosity of a child pulling wings off an insect. "Stay calm," Nathan managed to say, though his voice was strained. "Don't fight back, just observe." But staying calm was impossible when reality itself was rejecting your presence. Owen felt his body beginning to dissolve at the edges, his consciousness fragmenting into pieces that couldn't quite remember how to fit together. He could see Kevin beside him experiencing the same thing, his form becoming translucent, insubstantial. And through it all, he could feel the lattice examining them with a precision that was absolutely terrifying. It was looking for something specific, some quality or characteristic that they no longer possessed. They had been accepted twice before, but now they were being rejected. And the rejection felt deeply, profoundly personal. Owen tried to maintain his scientific detachment, to observe and document as he had promised. But it was hard to think clearly when your atoms were being gently but firmly separated from each other, when time was becoming negotiable and space was folding in on itself in ways that made his mind scream. He saw the echoes of previous failed expeditions then, not as external visions, but as memories that he somehow shared. He experienced the Crithian science team's terror as they realized they were dying. He felt the Altarian military crew's rage as they tried to fight back and were systematically dismantled for their aggression. He lived through 1,000 deaths in the space between heartbeats, each one teaching him something new about what it meant to fail the lattice's test. And then, just as he was certain that dissolution was inevitable, something changed. The lattice paused in its examination. Owen felt its attention shift, focusing not on what they had been when they entered, but on what they had become in the process of being rejected. They were dying, yes, but they were dying while trying to understand. They were being destroyed, but they were facing destruction with curiosity rather than fear. They were, in other words, still passing the test even as they failed it. The sensation of dissolution reversed itself with shocking abruptness. Owen felt his consciousness snapping back together, his body remembering how to be solid and whole. The ship's systems came back online in sequence, and the hostile pressure of the lattice suddenly became something else entirely. It became an invitation, not to pass through, as they had done before, but to go deeper, to see what lay at the heart of the anomaly, the source of its testing, the reason for its existence. "Anyone else getting this?" Owen managed to ask. "Yeah," Kevin breathed. "It's showing us something, a path." "Not just a path," Nathan said, his voice carrying an edge of awe that Owen had never heard before. "A destination." Owen's instruments showed readings that defied conventional physics. There was something at the center of the lattice, something that existed in more dimensions than the three they normally inhabited. Something that was simultaneously infinitely far away and right in front of them. Something that was waiting. "Do we follow it?" Owen asked. "We came here to understand," Nathan replied. "I don't think we have a choice." Owen adjusted their course, following the path that the lattice was showing them. The journey felt less like traveling through space and more like descending through layers of reality itself. Each layer peeled away another comfortable assumption about how the universe worked, revealing something stranger and more profound beneath. They descended through spaces where cause and effect were suggestions rather than laws. They passed through dimensions where time flowed in multiple directions simultaneously. They witnessed vistas that existed only in the abstract, geometric impossibilities made manifest through will rather than physics. And at the center of it all, they found the source. It wasn't a ship or a device or any kind of technological construct. It was a being, or perhaps many beings merged into something singular, a consciousness so vast that it made the lattice itself seem like nothing more than a sensory organ, an extension of awareness into the space that lesser species inhabited. Owen tried to comprehend what he was seeing and found his mind rebelling against the impossibility. This thing had been here for longer than his species had existed. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, had seen stars born and die, had witnessed the slow evolution of intelligence across the galaxy. And it had been testing, selecting, choosing. The being communicated not in words, but in pure concept. Ideas that downloaded themselves directly into Owen's consciousness with a clarity that bypassed language entirely. "You return. We wanted to understand," Nathan said, speaking for all of them. "We wanted to know what you are. I am the threshold. I am the passage between what is and what might be. I am the test that determines worthiness." "Worthy of what?" Owen asked. "Ascension, evolution, transformation into something more than you currently are." The being showed them images then, visions of what lay beyond the lattice for those who passed its tests. Species that had evolved beyond physical form, consciousnesses that could travel between dimensions without ships, intelligences that had transcended the limitations of matter and energy. But the path to that existence was narrow and dangerous. Only those who could truly let go of their need for control, their attachment to physical reality, their fear of dissolution, only they could make the transition without being destroyed by it. The lattice was a filter, exactly as they had suspected. But it wasn't filtering for cruelty or arbitrary reasons. It was filtering because the transformation it offered would destroy anyone who wasn't ready for it. The failed expeditions hadn't been killed out of hostility. They had killed themselves by resisting something that required absolute surrender. "The 300 individuals who crossed successfully," Kevin said slowly. "What happens to them?" "They have been marked. When they are ready, when their species is ready, they will be called to complete the transformation. They will become the bridges between what you are and what you might become." "And if we refuse," Nathan asked, "if we decide we don't want this transformation?" "Then you remain as you are. The choice has always been yours. I do not force evolution. I merely provide the opportunity for those capable of accepting it." Owen felt the weight of what they had discovered pressing down on him. The void lattice wasn't a navigation hazard or a cosmic anomaly. It was a chrysalis, a transition point between states of existence so different that most beings couldn't even conceive of the difference. And humanity had stumbled into it by accident, succeeding where others had failed because their particular brand of stubborn curiosity happened to align with the requirements for passage. "Why reveal this to us now?" Owen asked. "Why show us the truth when you could have let us keep using the lattice without understanding it?" "Because you chose to return knowing you would likely die. Because you prioritized understanding over survival. Because you demonstrated the capacity for curiosity in the face of dissolution, the fundamental requirement for what lies ahead." The being paused, and Owen felt its attention focusing on them with an intensity that made his consciousness ache. "And because your species is approaching a choice point. A moment where the path splits between remaining as you are and becoming something more. You deserve to know what that choice entails." "What choice?" Nathan asked. "War is coming to your galaxy. Forces from beyond will arrive seeking to harvest intelligent life, to strip consciousness from physical form for purposes you would find abhorrent. Your kind will have to decide whether to fight as you are, limited, vulnerable, mortal, or to accept transformation into something that can resist." The revelation hit Owen like a physical blow. Everything they had been through, everything they had discovered, had been preparation for something far larger and more terrible than they had imagined. "When?" Kevin asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Soon. Perhaps within your lifetimes, perhaps within your children's. Time is fluid at scales such as these. But the harvest is coming, and when it arrives, only those who have evolved beyond physical limitation will be able to resist." "So we have no choice," Owen said bitterly. "Transform or die." "You always have a choice, but some choices are easier than others." The being began to withdraw then, pulling its consciousness back from direct contact with theirs. But before it fully departed, it left them with one final gift: complete knowledge of the lattice's nature, perfect understanding of how to teach others to cross, and the terrible awareness of exactly what they were preparing their species for. The lucky fool was expelled from the lattice's heart with gentle finality, emerging back into normal space exactly where they had entered. The chronometers showed that 6 hours had passed, though Owen's subjective experience suggested it had been both longer and shorter than that. They drifted in silence for long minutes, each of them processing what they had learned. The magnitude of it was overwhelming. They hadn't just discovered a shortcut through space. They had stumbled upon the next stage of galactic evolution, a transformation so profound that most species couldn't even survive the attempt. And they had been chosen to carry that knowledge back to their people. "We have to tell the Council," Kevin said finally. "They need to know what's coming." "They won't believe us," Owen replied. "How do you explain something like that? By the way, there's an ancient intelligence at the center of the lattice that's preparing our species for a war against extra-dimensional harvesters. They'll think we've lost our minds." "Then we show them the data," Nathan said. "We have sensor logs, biometric readings, everything we recorded during the encounter. Let the evidence speak for itself." "And if they still don't believe us?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, staring at the lattice boundary as if he could still see through it to the impossible being that waited at its heart. "Then we prepare anyway," he said finally. "Because believing or not believing doesn't change what's coming. The harvest will arrive whether we're ready for it or not. At least now we have a chance to get ready." The journey back to the council station felt longer than any of their previous trips. They transmitted their initial findings as they traveled, careful scientific language that documented their encounter without fully capturing its significance. The response from council researchers was predictable. Extreme skepticism mixed with demands for more data, more proof, more evidence that what they were claiming was real. By the time they docked at the station, a full scientific review board had been assembled to evaluate their claims. The interrogation that followed made their previous debriefings look casual by comparison. Every statement was challenged, every piece of data questioned, every conclusion subjected to rigorous scrutiny. But the evidence was undeniable. Their sensor logs showed things that shouldn't be possible. Their biometric data recorded states of consciousness that defied current understanding of neurology. And most compelling of all, they had returned from an encounter that should have killed them with knowledge that was immediately verifiable, accurate predictions about the lattice's behavior that could be tested and confirmed. The scientific community spent 3 weeks trying to disprove their findings before reluctantly admitting that something significant had occurred. The political ramifications took longer to process. How did you tell a galaxy that everything they thought they knew about reality was wrong? That they were being prepared for a war they hadn't known was coming? Ambassador Thelkan convened a private meeting with the human team 4 weeks after their return. "The Council has reviewed your findings," he said, his throat sacs pulsing in patterns that suggested deep unease. And while many delegates remain skeptical of your interpretations, none can deny the raw data. Something exists at the heart of the lattice, something intelligent and purposeful. And the warning about the harvest? Nathan asked. Thelkan's scales rippled. That information has been classified at the highest levels. The Council does not wish to cause panic across dozens of species based on predictions from an entity whose motivations we don't fully understand. So, they're just going to ignore it? No, Thelkan said carefully. But neither are they prepared to transform galactic policy based on a warning whose timeline is uncertain and whose source is questionable. However, Owen prompted. However, certain preparations are being quietly authorized. Research into the transformation process, training programs for individuals who demonstrate the psychological capacity for lattice passage, strategic planning for scenarios involving unconventional threats. In other words, they're hedging their bets, Kevin observed. In other words, Thelkan agreed, they are doing what wise leaders do when faced with warnings they cannot fully verify but dare not completely ignore. They prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. It wasn't ideal, but Owen supposed it was better than nothing. At least some preparations were being made, some contingencies being planned. If and when the harvest arrived, they wouldn't be completely unprepared. The lucky fool remained docked at the council station for another 2 weeks while final reports were filed and recommendations were drafted. During that time, Owen found himself unable to shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something vast and irrevocable. The galaxy was changing, transforming in ways that most beings couldn't yet perceive, and they were somehow at the center of it. It was Nathan who finally put the feeling into words during one of their evening discussions. "We've become guides," he said quietly. "Whether we wanted to or not, we're the ones who understand how to cross the threshold. That makes us responsible for helping others make the choice when the time comes." "I'm not sure I want that responsibility," Owen admitted. "Neither am I," Nathan replied, "but I don't think we get a choice. We saw what's coming. We know what's at stake. That knowledge comes with obligations." Kevin nodded slowly. "So what do we do now?" Nathan smiled, that familiar expression of someone who had just accepted an impossible challenge. "We do what humans do best. We prepare, we adapt, and we make sure that when the harvest arrives, we're ready to show it exactly what happens when you try to prey on a species that survived the void lattice." They departed the council station 3 days later with a new contract, officially described as ongoing consultation regarding lattice navigation protocols, but really amounting to a blank check to continue their research. The council wanted them available, wanted their expertise accessible, and was willing to pay handsomely for the privilege. As the lucky fool pulled away from the station, Owen found himself looking back at the lattice boundary visible in the distance. Somewhere in there, at the heart of twisted space and impossible physics, an ancient intelligence waited patiently for the galaxy to evolve into something that could survive what was coming. And Owen realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that they had just taken the first steps on a journey that would reshape everything their species thought they knew about existence itself. The comm panel chimed with an incoming message. Owen glanced at the sender ID and felt his breath catch. It was from Kesh, the Sleen pilot they had guided through the lattice. "You need to see this," the message read. 14 more Sleen have successfully crossed, but something's different. They're reporting changes, physical changes. Evolution is beginning. Owen shared the message with Nathan and Kevin, watching as the implications settled over them. "It's starting," Kevin whispered. "The transformation. Sooner than we thought." Nathan's expression was unreadable. "Then we need to move faster. If the evolution is already beginning, the harvest can't be far behind." Owen brought up star charts plotting courses to human space and beyond. "Where do we go first?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the infinite possibilities spread across their displays. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible purpose. "We go home," he said. "We warn our people. And then we start teaching everyone who'll listen how to survive what's coming." The lucky fool turned toward Earth, carrying 3 humans who had accidentally discovered the secret of galactic evolution and the burden of knowledge that came with it. Behind them, the void lattice pulsed with light that existed across multiple dimensions, and at its heart, an ancient intelligence smiled in ways that transcended physical expression. The selection was proceeding according to plan. The harvest was coming, and humanity, stubborn, curious, impossibly adaptable humanity, had just been given the tools they would need to survive it. And if they were willing to pay the price of transformation,